Changing my propulsion. Object should be coming into view shortly. We need to see if this thing is hostile. What is that? Oh my god. What is that thing? The light seems to be fluctuating. It can't stay. Well, hello, and welcome back to BookSquirrel, and this is my review for Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. BookSquirrel. I don't know. Rendezvous with Rama is only my fourth book from my 20 top-ranked sci-fi book TBR tier list. It's been too long since I just read like a nice science fiction book, and man, I'm excited to talk about this one. I decided to do this one at night because I feel like it's closer to like space. As per the usual in my individual book review videos, I will be rating this book on 5 separate topics using my ACORN system, and those categories are approach, characters, offerings, readability, and narration. Each category is out of a potential 20 acorns for a potential total of 100 acorns. The question is Rendezvous with Rama entire winter's worth of acorns? But first, let's get to some details. My copy of Rendezvous with Rama is about 243 pages long. It was originally published in June of 1973. Mine is the Bantam edition, which was published in December of 1990. And here is the blurb. I'm reading this in the dark, so I apologize. I'm going to be like, the Ramans are here. At first, only a few things are known about the celestial object that astronomers dub Rama. It is huge. It weighs more than 10 trillion tons, and it is hurtling through the solar system at inconceivable speed. Then a space probe confirms the unthinkable. Rama is no natural object. It is incredibly an interstellar spacecraft. Space explorers and planet-bound scientists alike prepare for mankind's first encounter with alien intelligence. It will kindle their wildest dreams and fan their darkest fears. For no one knows who the Ramans are or why they have come, and now the moment of rendezvous awaits just behind a Raman airlock door. Ooh. Let's get to those acorns, shall we? Approach. I just read the blurb. As you can tell from the blurb, this is a big dumb object story where they have this thing coming into view and oh my gosh, what is it? It's not an asteroid. It is a spacecraft. That sounds right up my alley. I love these kinds of stories, and I was hooked from the blurb. I knew I wanted to read this. I think I rated this as super hyped on my TBR tier list. It's been a while since I visited that video, but either way, I was very excited, maybe adequately hyped. The cover, I'll put up a different cover. The lower part is the Endeavor, and that is our spacecraft that we send to make the rendezvous with this other massively cylindrical spacecraft that we dub Rama. And that's actually what you see in the other part of this cover above the Endeavor. I thought for a while that was just like some kind of metal flourish. I didn't realize that was actually Rama. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of like Star Trek Next Generation, which I love. I grew up watching that show and Voyager and Deep Space Nine. And so I really like having those kind of older looking CGI visuals. And frankly, this image goes into more detail about what Endeavor looks like than the actual book, so at least that's a nice reference. I usually include about the first 10% of the book in my approach score. And one thing that really took me by surprise is that we get to the rendezvous almost instantly. The first chunk of this book is almost like a historical retelling of the moments that lead up to this rendezvous. And so we get to the promise of the book, A Rendezvous with Rama, right away. I thought it was going to be kind of a slower burn, kind of like what we have with Blindsight, but no, this is within that 10%, the rendezvous had already started. I was really happy to see that a majority of the book is actually devoted to the rendezvous itself and not with just the lead up. Also within that 10%, not only are we introduced to the ship that's making the rendezvous and some of the characters on that ship, but we're introduced also to this committee back on the moon made up of ambassadors of various colonies throughout the solar system that we've established. So I was already like, that's a cool idea too. And right off the jump, we've kind of got these two perspectives, those that are doing the rendezvous and then the people on the committee on the moon looking at it from a distance. And so I thought, cool, I'm excited. One thing that did end up causing me to deduct a couple of points from the approach is, given that we're introduced to so many people right off the bat, there is a bit of a name soup that happens. Some of these names are really only relevant to the discoveries they made leading up to the rendezvous, while other ones carry on well into the story, but you don't really know that at the beginning. And so it was just a lot to remember at first, up front. And so because of that, I did deduct a couple points. So in the end, I gave Rendezvous with Rama 18 out of 20 acorns for the approach. Characters. As I mentioned in the approach score, there was a bit of a name soup that happened at the beginning of this book. Lots of different scientists, ambassadors, a bunch of the crew of the Endeavor. And so there's a lot of different characters that are introduced. Arthur C. Clarke really took like the people that he saw in reality, the dreams they had, the ideals they had, the motivations they had, and really just translated it into the future. So it actually makes these characters fairly believable. It also makes them a little boring at times, and they kind of meld together because the characters really is a secondary aspect to this story, because the primary one is the rendezvous. It's in the scientific exploration of this ship. And so the discovery and the observations come first, and the characters do take a little bit of a backseat. And there's a little bit of convenience when it came to characters. Some on the crew of the Endeavor just kind of pop out of nowhere when it's convenient for them to be a part of the story. Their expertise is important to the mission. At one point it was like, wait, where does this crew end? Like, how many people are actually on? You never really are told the finite number of people in the crew of the Endeavor. And so sometimes it's just like, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. Well, and then there is a tendency for Arthur C. Clarke to kind of write them out or not really include them once their purpose is fulfilled. The characters were just a little weak, in my opinion, because of that. And there were a couple of really interesting ideas that he puts forth with like the idea of like religion, how religion has morphed into the year of 2131, how people from Mercury are different, how people from Mars are different. But unfortunately, it's a bit superficial in most instances. And Arthur C. Clarke doesn't really take some of these ideas like really to fruition, but they still were serviceable. The characters were still serviceable and likable to a degree, and I think they did play their part. But now I kind of think I'm just talking in circles. So for Rendezvous with Rama, I gave 16 out of 20 acorns for characters. Offerings. The offerings in this book are plentiful. Rendezvous with Rama is a very imaginative book. And the offerings in this book are really where the strengths of this story lie. There's a bunch of things in this category that I'm not going to talk about because that would be a spoiler to the book, because so much of the book is about the scientific exploration, and similar to Blindsight, it's the discoveries that you find along the way that really add to the offerings of the book. Some of the offerings I've already mentioned, such as it's set in 2131, humanity has found a way to expand their permanent residency from just Earth to also include the moon, Mercury, Mars, and then a couple of moons around Jupiter and Neptune. That's one interesting thing that I do like about this story, is this exploration of what would it mean if we were to develop colonies in various parts of the solar system. I will say I think the biggest offering in this book that I can talk about is the vibe that Arthur C. Clarke offers with this story. A lot of times when you hear of like a first contact story, you think of Alien, you think of Threats, War of the Worlds, where you kind of almost immediately go into like either an attack or a defensive stance. something combative. This book is very different. It focuses much more on the scientific analysis and discovery of things regarding this ship and the alien technology in it. I think it's closer to stories like Arrival or Contact. It really is more about the limitations of science, letting the combat and the thrills and the chills take a backseat and really focus more on just the discovery. And if that sounds good to you, like, that is the main offering of this book. And I think that Arthur C Clarke does a great job in giving it to you. There's plenty else that I'm not going to talk about. You'll just have to read the book to really get into some of those other offerings. But because there's plenty, I gave Rendezvous with Rama a 20 out of 20 in offerings. Readability. Rendezvous with Rama has a lot going for it. It's relatively short. I like short books. Being just under 250 pages, it's relatively easy to get through. The chapters are very short, but the thing is that they're concise. They're short because each one represents a different story beat, and so it's really focusing in on progressing the story pretty much throughout every chapter. The language is mostly accessible. It is a dense book, and there are definitely some opportunities for learning some spacefaring words such as perihelion. That's a word that's used a lot in this book. There's a good chunk of technicality in the storytelling, so that might deter some people, but overall I felt like it was relatively engaging and easy to get through. I always think it's pretty funny when the stories that are set in the far future reference things from the mid or early 20th century. This book was obviously published in the 1970s, so there are some very outdated references, but those to me add more flavor and like time capsule-y kind of vibes. Although I did have to research some of these things, such as who Arnold Toynbee is, stuff like that. Like, I thought that was kind of funny. And I will say that there are a couple of just minor triggers, things that aren't really parts of the story. They're not really that big or reoccurring. But this was written in 1970s, so there is a little bit of misogyny. There's a question on whether or not women should even be in space. And yet there are these super chimps in space, bred specifically to do menial labor tasks on spacecrafts. And some of them have really, really unfortunate names that, when tied with the fact that they are monkeys, can come across pretty racist. And frankly, they could be taken out of the book and nothing would really change. But just to throw that out there, because the kind of little trigger warnings are something that I do try to keep up with on the readability category. So just wanted you to be aware of those. And some of the main characters in this book are female. Right? Not a whole lot of them, but they are there. And when they're there and they're being part of the crew, the misogyny is just it's just gone. So overall, I felt like this was a fairly readable book. So I gave Rendezvous with Rama an 18 out of 20 acorns in readability. And narration. I mentioned in my approach that I was really glad to see the rendezvous being introduced very quickly. We don't waste a whole lot of time leading up to contact with the ship. It is almost hyper-focused on this rendezvous, which I think lends well to the story that is here. I will say that in the exploration of Rama, there are some repetitive moments, especially in like the middle of the book. For instance, there is a staircase that you will become incredibly familiar with. And it makes me go like, why do we need to spend so much time on this staircase? So that did suffer a little bit. But again, like the chapters are pretty short. So even the ones that focus on the staircase go by really fast, and you're on to the next thing. There's a lot of progression that happens. And one thing that I was really impressed with Arthur C Clarke's narration was how he was able to describe the layout and the design of the ship and the foreign objects they were encountering. A lot of time when it comes to these things, these descriptions can just go right over my head. But Arthur C Clarke spent a really good amount of time in describing the layout of this and the layout of that. And then here's another way to look at it. And then it kind of forms this if you look at it from a different angle. So I felt like he held my hand really well in translating these visuals to me as a reader. And at one point, it was so effective that I actually got vertigo. just reading the book. It gave me vertigo for a moment. And I'm someone who usually gets vertigo if I'm like in a downtown area or I'm just by some like massive objects. I don't know if you've ever been to House on the Rock in Wisconsin, but there is a room with a giant whale sculpture. It is so large that like my first time going there, I had no idea it was there. And I got vertigo. I had to sit down on a bench nearby and do one of these things. And when it came to like downtown areas, it's because the buildings are so high. My brain goes, if this is so big, that makes me like a speck of dust. I am so insignificant that at any point gravity might no longer pertain to me if I acknowledge how much gravity this thing needs, and therefore I'll just float up into the sky and disappear. I mean, that's kind of where my vertigo stems in downtown areas, but it translates to pretty much anything that's like super massive. I used to have nightmares of just being next to just the most immense structures. I couldn't even wrap my brain around it. And there is an effective moment in this book where the way he described it, I was like, whoa, like, I was there with the characters, okay? Obviously, this book hinges on the mystery of the Ramans, who they are, and what this ship is, and that is told incredibly effectively, in my opinion, throughout. And I found it to be very satisfying. And I like stories where the conflict isn't so much of, oh my god, dangerous alien race, shoot 'em, and instead is more on the limitations of the tools we have, our own capabilities of human beings, not really necessarily being able to comprehend or really be able to wrap our head around something or really physically be able to do something. I like that kind of conflict, and that was in here to a good degree. And the emphasis on these limitations, to me, lended very well to the book's believability and to the credibility of this story as being one of scientific exploration. Because if you know anything about science, it is that we are practically defined by our limitations, the limitations in knowledge and the limitations in acquiring answers. And that is a huge theme in this book. I think that it lends very well to not only the ending, but also to Arthur C. Clarke's just ability to look at a science fiction story with the science part really prevalent. So overall, I thought that the storytelling was much more successful than it wasn't. So I give Rendezvous with Rama 18 out of 20 acorns in narration. All right, so that gives my total score for Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama a 90 out of 100 acorns. I thought that this was an incredibly successful read. I really enjoyed the exploration in this story. I really found the ending to be satisfying. I found it to be very consistent throughout. I don't really know how much rereadability a book like this has, given so much of it is about the exploration. I don't know. I did rate it 2 points higher than Blindsight, which is probably the closest thing that I've read to this. While I love Blindsight in so many other ways, I think that the characters in Blindsight are much stronger than in this book. I do think this book has more readability. It's easier to grasp overall, and I really think it's the type of read that I just don't feel like I get enough of, which is really about the science. It's not about the, oh, look at this like scary thing in my face. It almost feels like a historical account of some big scientific exploration that we had as a human species, and I think that's really fun. That's why I gravitate towards NASA and to space exploration in general, because you're left with so much wonder, and this book really digs in to the wonder. And that's why I think this is very, very successful. Just a little bit more successful to me than Blindsight. Although I will say I already want to reread that book and see if I have a reevaluation of it, but I'll wait a good chunk of time before I do that, because I literally read it in October. All right, so 90 points. That technically makes it a 4.5 star on that rating scale. And yeah, I'm really, really glad that I got to this book. Loved it. Highly recommend it if what I said to you about the vibes and the themes sound interesting. Now, when it comes to my next book, I have an order of books that are still on the way, so I really only have 2 to choose from, Parable of the Sower and Pen Pal. I decided on Pen Pal. I couldn't find a copy of this book anywhere, so I had to get it digitally via Amazon. Bookshop.org did not have Pen Pal at all, so I'm going to be reading this one digitally, but I'm excited for it. It's going to be another spooky one, I guess. And why not why not go to my horror TBR list next, right? And then from there, I'll probably read one from my Black authors list and just kind of repeat the cycle. So what did you think about Rendezvous with Rama? Have you read this? Would you change any of my scores? Did you have a different experience with this? Let me know in the comments. And otherwise, I will see you next time with my review of Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. Well, I hope you have a wonderful whatever, and I will talk to you later. Bye. Book Squirrel. I don't know.